first thing that I'm going to do, Andrew, just so people know what's going on if they're listening to this, is I'm going to say a big thank you, not only to yourself, but also to everyone watching or listening to this for sharing presence and time with us today, because Andrew and myself have decided to collaborate on this idea that I had to do a talk to help you, our viewers, our listeners, get closer to the divine source. Now, I am going to start off by saying this isn't really a religious talk in any way, shape, or form as such. It's very much a spiritual talk because the concept of getting closer to God, I use that term, I believe that term, but some people say the universe, some people say the absolute or source or whatever. It doesn't matter what word you use because Andrew is a person who combines multiple traditions. 21 years as a Trappist monk, a lot of time to get closer to God there, which we'll touch on today. Obviously, a Celtic priest as well, Buddhist practitioner, shamanic practitioner. He combines many different traditions, shadow coach, and is available for your needs after today. But really, we are having a conversation today just about getting a little bit closer to the divine, or if you've already had experiences of the divine in your life and you don't know what it means, hopefully today we will clarify a few points. Now, I am also going to say that I'm not putting Andrew on the spot to answer the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. As I joked with him before we started, we all know it's 42 anyway, so we're okay. But with that being said, by Andrew sharing some of his experiences with you today, I do hope that it helps you to gain some clarity, gain some meaning, gain some understanding in your own search for the divine in whichever way you interpret that, and regardless of the path that you use to get there, because the paths do vary. So stay tuned for what will be a fascinating talk. I'm very, very sure about that. And Andrew, it's really good to connect with you again. And I know we were having a good chat just now before we started recording and everything, but it is good to see you. And as I've said, I appreciate you making the time for this today.
Good to
Thank
see
you.
you as well, Liam.
Absolutely. So, right. So starting at the beginning, or it's not really I don't know if it's really the beginning as such, but one of the things I would like to touch on when we did our interview last time, because I should have said as well that our Andrew and myself, our previous interview is available to watch on my YouTube channel, Simply Inspired as well. From punk to Trappist monk, it's a great talk about the spiritual life and the spiritual path. So today is a follow-up of that. But anyway, Andrew, getting back to the point there, one of the things you said in that interview was you said there was a point in time in your life where you became aware from your perception that God is real, and that was obviously a turning point in your life. I believe we were discussing the whole transition from being a punk to joining the Trappists, but in your own words, I would just like to get into what that experience felt like, if it's something that can be adequately put into words, which it might not be. But let us attempt to describe when you first became aware that God really exists. May we start there, please?
Thank God exists. Yeah, well, I remember it very well. I had just turned around, um, uh, not so much physically, but psychologically, just turned around and away from the edge of a cliff, from blackness, from the possibility of jumping in, and I think that would have meant giving up responsibility for myself and some kind of insanity or something. I don't know. I have met some people who seem all right, but then they can start talking, offensively, or they're not there anymore. And I think I could kind of sense that something like that was out there, and I got scared. So I turned around. Before this, I've been living my own life. I was my God in my life, right? I could do anything I thought. I know what I'm doing, and I will not ask anyone for help, and they can all actually, um, you know, go to hell. Um, I'll do it on my own. And whatever reasons I had for all that, that's by the way at the moment, because I'll try and keep it on point. So turning around from being scared and coming to the end of my rope, I suddenly discovered that I wasn't in a little cell, the little cell of my mind, my own mind and my own thinking. Or if I looked that way, I was, but if I turned around, the door or the wall actually was open. And standing in the door was a presence. I just felt a presence. And, you know, we know these things intuitively or somehow, that it was, you know, a huge, all-knowing, loving presence. And then I said to myself, you know, dang, so God exists. And not long after that, I thought to myself, wow, then I exist. So I exist as well. But it was, I realized now, many years later on, or years after that, that it's not so much I as I think I am, but I as I really am, as shall we say, spirit. Yeah.
That makes sense, actually. And
I can see someone creeping up on you, Liam. Is that supposed to be or the mice very big in your place?
yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah, big mice. But no, there's a little bit, be a little bit of movement, but not too much. Uh,
Okay.
but no, all I can say with that, just so it doesn't slip my mind to mention, Andrew, is that I've had something very similar in my own life, and I won't go off topic into that here. But let's just say that I completely know what you mean in my own way. Uh,
Great.
Okay, so then obviously this caused a change in your life very significantly. And again, I think that is a life lesson because first of all, you were mentioning there you were your own God, there's an element of the ego, there's an element of your own decision making, there's an element of shaping your life, including the whole punk aspect and the aggression, which I feel a lot of times is keeps people away with the shock factor. But a lot of people I've met in that movement actually have been very sensitive underneath, which is interesting, and that's another story. But anyway, so you were doing that, and then obviously this decision to join the Trappist. It's not something that everyone would want to do, but then you made the decision to get closer and to say, okay, I'm going to delve into getting close to the divine, getting close to God, immersing myself in this feeling. I mean, the decision making on one level is important, but really, what was your decision to pursue God or pursue the divine to that degree, rather than just to step back and say, okay, I've had this experience and I know that something bigger than me is there, so I can deal with that. Do you understand what I'm getting?
Absolutely, absolutely, because it would not have been enough, just that understanding that God exists, okay, fine, then I have to leave room for that. But me being such a kind of a 100% guy, I go for it or I don't. And, as a punk, I thought the world was bullshit, so I went 100% protesting and showing people, mirroring to people that it was a load of I didn't have a very high regard of the whole social system, and it was something I couldn't personally accept. But between that turning around, that metanoia, as they call it in Greek, and entering the monastery, there were quite a few years. But shortly after this moment, I started meditating. I got a do-it-yourself meditation book, and I just used to sit twice a day. And I remember having some experience there as well, a metaphysical experience, right at the beginning of starting the path of meditation. And I don't remember too much. I do remember coming back down into my body. And then I thought to myself, oh, so it's not just this, what we can see. So that was another kind of like confirmatory experience of what I'd already had. But the key thing, and remains to this day, the most powerful thing, I'm a little bit shy about sharing this, but I should, I guess, um, was that I was, again, a year or two further on, I was going around looking at all these orders because I thought if God exists, then I'm going to open my life to him. You know, what I want doesn't really matter, I thought. I want to stay in contact with God and with this love, right? Although it wasn't quite that far then, but I was with the Franciscans in North Wales, just on one of these come and see vocation weekends. And I was looking for a place, you know, some kind of role in the church. And again, because maybe of the place, or rather the people and the way they were talking with all their, you know, Christian spiel and all that, I thought, yeah, this isn't it for me, really. It's not for me. So I was in the chapel, the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, and I sat there and I said, I give up. You know, on the end of my rope, I just give up. And at that moment, there was this like splinter. So there was exposition. I don't know if you know these Catholic terms, but it's like the monstrance is there and the living presence of God is there. And a splinter of light shot out towards me like an arrow and poof, straight through my heart. And I silently, of course, I was weeping very deeply, very deeply. And then I knew God loved me. I just knew there was all this wonderful, rich, complete, it's just inexpressibly deep love, you know. And I think that was probably the first time I've ever felt anything like that in my life, this unconditional love. So our first experience of love is usually through our parents, our first gods. And in my case, it was always, you know, we'll love you if you do this, if you do that, if you're a good boy, if you mow the lawn, if you wash the car, blah, 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 etc. If you do well at school, if. And this was just like a state, a presence of, of love, of being totally accepted and totally loved as you are, which I completely misinterpreted, I think. I interpreted it in the way that I knew, which was okay, then there must be a requirement back. I now know that there wasn't any, but I thought at the time, oh, then I have to stay in touch with this somehow. I have to respond to it. So I kept on looking, and eventually it seemed to become the Trappists. You know, even though I did not. This is quite important. I did not want to become a monk.
Mm. But you felt you had to, based on.
Because of my way of interpreting love, yeah, I felt I had to give something back.
Mm. And in that sense, you gave your life from a certain perspective. I mean, that is very much quite the commitment. But it's also valuable, as you said, that people don't have to do that, obviously, and they don't have to respond to it. And I do remember you touched on this in our former interview, and you mentioned that within this context, the love is so unconditional. The example that you used, I believe, was that you could be a couch potato, you could do nothing, you could, watch TV for the next 20 years until you pass away or whatever,
Yeah,
and this love would still be there for you, if you like. So, a very fascinating analogy. But obviously, people do want to get close to it, not necessarily always in the conditional sense. I do believe there's a degree of understanding, and I know that it's not always necessary because some of these experiences are beyond our understanding, and as you've already said, understanding what this is another form of response. So I do understand the connection there. But if people are at the level that you were at then, if you like, particularly the sort of cliff top level, or the meditation, some of these experiences, and they're thinking, okay, what are these? What are some ways that you would suggest they could get more comfortable with these kinds of experiences, not so much in a response, but in a I suppose the familiarity would be the best
Hmm.
word.
I think the first, if I was giving advice to myself back then, now, I would say first thing is to do nothing, just to have a cup of tea. Sit down, calm down, have a cup of tea, carry on with your normal life if you can, and have a good look at how these feelings are affecting you. Now, depending on how strong they are, that may not be possible, of course. If you read the lives of the saints or the holy fools, if you get a big download, if you get a really big taste of uh, actually what we ourselves are, then you may appear to go off the rails, yes. So you may not be able to sit down and have a cup of tea. You may actually, want to go into a cave somewhere or whatever. So I would say, on top of the tea, I'd say go and see your spiritual friend, which in the Celtic tradition is called your Anam Cara, your soul friend, somebody who knows you, somebody who will offer you another cup of tea, probably, um, and who will talk to you about calmly about, what's been going on, because there is a rational part to this as well. And you can damage yourself. You can go, a little bit crazy for a while. It does happen. So
The whole thing about that though, is that because I mean, in my own experience and in the experience of a lot of people I speak to, that craziness from a certain perception is because of so many things we thought we knew that are no longer obviously valid, often right down to the core. And particularly in my own life, it's been a lot of motivations, if we like, and things I thought I was aspiring to, and whole belief structures that have, gone down like a house of cards, and that can be very, very difficult to digest. And so you may hear my cat in the background. She wants to join in, I think. But after the mice, you see, Andrew, that's what it is. But anyway, what was I saying? So with that concept, this is where I'm interested in the different traditions because certainly in my own life, the concept of Buddhism, the concept of self-awareness, shamanism, shadow work, these things to do with working through and restructuring aspects of myself have therefore accelerated the process of getting closer to the divine. Not that it needs accelerating like that, but I see almost a two-way street, if you like, between getting closer to God as in the divine, but also removing some of my own shadows has also allowed that to come closer more frequently, if I'm making sense with this. And I'm curious on your thoughts on that. I mean, this is quite a broad question, I know, but in the sense that you didn't just stay with the Trappists, you then went into Buddhism and you went into Celtic Buddhism, particularly shamanism, shadow work, and different interpretations, which is why I said at the beginning the road that people take to get to where we're talking about, not that it's a destination, but you know what I mean, that the path that we take to uncover or to look behind the curtain, if you like, of life does vary. What are your thoughts on people combining different traditions if they want to, and the best way to potentially go about that?
I think it's entirely up to them. Spirituality, or the path, shall we say, to God is very, very individual, very, very unique, very private.
Mm.
And if it makes sense to that person, if that whatever they're doing is attractive to them, if there's energy in it, they should follow it. Um, but all these paths and means are but that they are not ends in themselves. Yeah. So the key, and they all come down to actually, eventually, they all boil down to the key notion, and that is that it's not so much us trying to get closer to God. It's actually, as you were hinting at, it's becoming clearer in the awareness that God is already here. He's closer to our own hearts than we are to ourselves. Yeah. So if you follow this thinking through, it has amazing consequences in the world of thought, which can be very helpful for some people who are, stuck on the dogma of a church or a religion or something like that. They can't agree with that. The language of a religion, the official language of the religion is like they call it the talk of the marketplace. But then there's the talk of the bedroom of the lovers, the ones who really want to know God, and nothing more than that. They don't want to make a career out of knowing God. They're not bartering in the business of knowing God. They just want to know God, and they're not asking for anything. That's the sign of the devotee. They're not asking for anything. They come to serve and this is where it really becomes the core issue. They come to surrender. They come actually, we were talking just before we started about death. They come actually to, in a way, to die. They come to give up their own way of seeing things, give up their own preferences and their own way of life, give up their own wisdom. Surrender is a very big and very frightening for the ego subject, shall we say, or reality. It's more than a subject.
Mm. Yes, it is. And again, this is something that, in my mind, crosses different traditions as well, including your own involvement, because obviously with Buddhism, the selfless state and the egoless state and letting go of self-cherishing and our interconnectedness with the world and all of these things is very strong. But also with the Trappists as well, I find it fascinating. For instance, something like the minimalization of speaking. I've read, and you'll have to correct me if this is accurate or not. I read initially that they take a vow of silence, and then when I dug deeper, it apparently is not total silence. It's just, speaking when it's necessary. Is that correct, first of all, Andrew?
No, there's no vow of silence. No,
Is
that doesn't
there
exist.
is a vow of speaking?
But they observe silence. Yeah, they observe. So you have three vows. One is poverty,
Mm.
um, obedience, and the last one is not chastity. It's conversio morum, which means to live like a monk. And in that is implied chastity, but also community, and also observing silence and living in a culture of silence, especially amongst the Trappists, who are a little bit stricter than most of the others. But
Mm.
we talked for work, and you might say like on a Sunday, there wasn't much free time as a Trappist. But if on a Sunday, you might get an hour or two in the afternoon, perhaps after all the work is done and the rituals have been done, to go for a walk with someone, and then you could have a chat. Yeah, that's entirely possible.
But and again, you have to correct me on this, the whole thing of the liturgy of the hours that I've come across of the day being broken into, um, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but the hour by hour segments, that is intended to produce a deeper form of surrender, like you were talking about earlier. Is that correct? In the sense that it's not your wishes, obviously, it's the community's wishes and so forth.
Yeah.
And from when I'm looking at it from, the outside looking in, that would seem to surrender or to cause or to certainly aid the surrender of a lot of
Yeah.
shall we say, the ego or the self-importance. Is
Kind
that
of byproduct. That's a byproduct. We don't Monks don't join the monastery to do that. They don't join the monastery to become enlightened or anything like that. It
mm,
in the course of just following the rules and doing what your brother does, bowing when he bows, you might not know why, but you're bowing, just do it. It's a form of selflessness. But the community as a whole, I can only talk about the Trappists now because I was only in the Trappists, um, has a function within the church. They say it's like a heart in the church, and everything that they do, morning till night, is offered up in a sort of spiritual, unseen way for the good of the church, for the good of the spirit, for the good good of goodness in God's name. But see, there are tremendous, not exactly flaws, but there are tremendous misunderstandings in the church, especially Pauline theology, about Christ dying for our sins and all that. That wasn't the point of it at all. That wasn't the point of it at all. Because that just makes us all out to be sinners. And then we're kind of stuck, aren't we? And then we need the priest, of course, to forgive us from our sins. There's a whole structure. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about a religion at all. It was really about what Christ was about, in my humble, showing us that we are not just bodies, we are not just the world, that there is this enormous true reality that exists. He's not going to interrupt me now, is he? No, that's all right.
No, no, she'll join in, and that's.
She's listening. She's just getting closer.
You are in good company, Andrew, because this cat is very selective with who she chooses to join. But anyway, no, it's not a problem. I mean, it's the thing with Zoom is we are in life, so I don't always follow.
We don't mind at all, do we?
I don't follow the perfectionism of those things because things do happen. But that does make a lot of sense. And I mean, that also clarifies a point that you were mentioning earlier about the unconditional nature, because obviously one of the things the church does is put the conditional nature of this aspect into the relationship with any followers. And so I find that fascinating that you've addressed the paradox there, as I mentioned earlier, because and it is something as well that when I explore different traditions and everything, it does vary. I mean, I've seen less of that in, say, where I am in Cyprus, Eastern Orthodox, and I've been exploring that a little bit. But there is still some, and it does vary by tradition. But I'm glad you addressed that paradox because it is something that people will wonder about. And the conditional versus unconditional love, I think, is an immensely valuable topic that people can delve into in and of itself. And also what you said about not getting closer to God and God being, close to us. I
He's
really,
right there, yeah. He's right there already. So when you spend the day with God, it sounds like effort, but it's not. It's more like relaxing and falling into God. Even when you're having a second bacon sandwich, or you're watching that corny old film that you've seen 3 times before, he's still there. He's still right there, and it's all okay. But if I really want to show my guts, as they say, to show the pearl in the oyster, what I live from, to a great extent, as far as thinking is concerned about these things, and it's how I used to start my workshops when I was giving them. I would always ask the group, after introducing them to meditation, I would always ask them, where does the world come from? And say, it seems to be an important question. We're in it all the time, apparently, and we're doing all these things, and we're interacting with it. Isn't it an important question? Where does it actually come from? That's rhetorical for now. I'm not asking you directly. And we often have that first evening, it's an icebreaker. We often have a very interesting conversation. And I will, we don't talk about it again usually on the weekend, but I will send them off to sleep that night with the thought that it can't come from God. It doesn't come from God. It can't, because were that so, God would be cruel, right? We see the father whose daughter has just been killed in a car accident. He turns around and goes, "How could you do this, God? How could you do this?"
yeah.
Well, he didn't. That's the wonderful, real good news. There is any good news. That's the good news, that God, I would even put it stronger, to go out on a limb and say that God doesn't know anything about it, because God is real and he is only concerned, only knows what is real, right?
Mm.
So if it's not God, where does the world come from? This is what I send, this is what we discuss. Where does it come from? Where does all the beauty of the world come from? But where does all the pain, all the death? We're born to die, let's face it. It's like a sad, sick joke. Uh, we can enjoy things, we can, accept it as it is. I couldn't, but a lot of people seem to be able to. And we can dance with it until we pop our clogs. But how can that belong to, if you define God, as the good, the everlasting, the unchangeable, there are loads of attributes, there are loads of descriptions of God. It's actually almost indescribable. God simply is. You can't have both. This is a very simple, reasonable logic that people can't fathom or refuse unconsciously to look at. You can't have both. So, in everything we do, this is practice, sorry to go on, you are unconsciously choosing between the red pill and the blue pill. Not that the matrix is a very good, it's an unsatisfactory simile, any metaphor anyway. But you're either choosing for the reality of this world, which is actually unreal, or you're choosing for God, for your true identity. Yeah? You're either choosing for your false identity, which dies, or your true identity, which was never born. How can it die? And to the extent that we feel peace is to the extent that we identify our real, solid spiritual nature. Sounds a weird way to put it, but the really real, or what the world offers us, which is a kind of, is a kind, actually a defense system against our own magnitude. And we are actually one with God. And this is why they stoned Yeshua, of course, because he was going around saying things like this. But he wasn't saying it to upset them. He was just expressing the reality that he lived and still lives. That's
Makes
big.
sense.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It definitely makes sense, though. I understand. I understand it in theory and certain aspects practice as well. But obviously, my understanding will deeper over time because from our perception of time, you've had more time to practice this and get used to all of this. But with
Mhm.
that being said, the that aspect of the world, and I think that anybody who spends time in the spiritual life in any tradition, and particularly when you spend time with advanced practitioners, one of the experiences I've had as well is you can feel that through them. So it's like spending time in their presence, and you start to become aware of the peacefulness and the non-attachment and all of these things. But it's much deeper than that because I'm not sure how many people will relate to this. I think some will, but I've certainly had the experience of just sitting with somebody, like we're talking now, and actually not talking that much and thinking, okay, there's something that exudes um, in their presence, if you like, that kind of snaps you out of regular consciousness on its own, however you define that. And it's a different interpretation, but certainly when my spiritual search started, that was actually a big part of it. It was like, okay, this person is on, in that sense on another level, or none of those terms are accurate, but it seemed like that at the time. And I thought, okay, where does that piece come from? And certainly what you're saying there, in my mind, links to that in an abstract way. But it makes a lot of sense, and it also answers the questions I had noted down about, the fear of death, and it also had the cruelty in the world, which is interesting because that is one of people's biggest barriers to it. Say, well, okay, do you believe in God? And you get the answers, yeah, he has a plan, this, that, and the other, or no, because if he was there, um, then how could this stuff happen? And what I like about what you've said there is you've cut through a lot of these common um, perceptions that most people have, whether they believe or not, and gone a stage further. But I do have to ask one question: is obviously when people have these breakthroughs, God wants nothing from us in that sense, as you've said already, go and have a cup of tea. But there does seem to be the influence in the sense that, as we were talking about earlier, the divine nudges, the divine downloads, writing or inspiration, or I need to contact this person, or even to a certain extent, I should say, the fact of the arrow, where you mentioned earlier that, your hand being pierced by this arrow, and then the pain and the understanding and all of these sorts of things. And I have experienced as well what I regard, some people would say it's an angel, some people would say it's a guide, or it's this or it's that, but other things that appear to influence our consciousness. And there appears to be a wider, I think they call it a cosmology, in the sense that we're talking very much here about us and God, but I've also had experiences, and I'll go out on a limb and say, with various other beings, and not only people who are supposedly deceased from a certain perspective, but also, as I've said, what I would regard to be like an angel or some form of something that's not human, but it is deeply loving and wishes to influence my life in a positive way. And let's just say that I'm as sure of that as I am that I'm sitting here now, particularly through dark times in my life, but also through various good times as well, to the point where I know I can count on it, them, whatever, including moving, for example, moving here to Cyprus, you get the mixed messages of, oh, that's a great idea, and oh, that's a terrible idea, and what's your plan? And it's like, well, okay, I have a plan, but I also know that any blanks in the plan will be filled in. Now, forgive me rambling with this one, Andrew, but there's a movie called The Adjustment Bureau with Matt Damon, where his life is influenced by these beings. I'm not sure if you've seen it. And although that's a dramatization, oh, you haven't, it's worth a watch. And there's also another movie called City of Angels, which is Nicolas Cage, and it's also worth a watch if you haven't seen that. Point is, those are dramatizations, obviously, yeah. But in my own life, I've definitely had those experiences of something that wants to influence my life in a positive way for some.
Mm.
Now, what are your thoughts on that? Because I've come across you working with, as I've said, the shamanic quality and Celtic fairies and different sort of beings and this type of thing. So, where do those kinds of things fit in with our relationship with our true spiritual life, as you were just saying, our relationship with God, our relationship with everything else? What's their part to play, I suppose, is the question that I'm asking. And I must admit, I'm deeply curious about this, even though I'm asking this for other people. This one, I've had those experiences. I'm thinking, okay, what is that? Including
Okay.
synchronicities. So, your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah. First, I said you need do nothing, but obviously we are touched by something and we feel inspired to do things, but
Mm,
there's no demand. That's the wonderful realization for me, and especially for pleasers, people who grow up as pleasers, that they only receive love if they making themselves useful, etc. So that's just something to bear in mind. But then there's inspiration, which is genuine and as freeing for the giver as the recipient. As for guides in general, yeah, of course. I would put it on the side of mind, your projection, like the world, but they are symbols of your higher um, wisdom, shall we say. So they are helping you uncover God in your life, yeah. Because that's what it's about, really, uncovering the reality of what is already there. Thank God, it's nothing. It's not that we're poor and we have to try and look for something. is waving.
I told you.
So yeah, I introduce clients to their whole inner network, their whole, we go journeying through their inner landscape, which is, psychological slash shamanic. There's an overlap there. They discover new guides and contacts, their helpers.
Mm.
They form a relationship with them, a warm, loving relationship, which they can build up with practice. And they can discover new skills in themselves. They can, for example, in my workshops, I would bring in two helpers for while I was drumming there, and they would do the rounds, and everyone, could be 8 people there, 10 people sometimes, which is a bit much, but and they would do the rounds and do things to them quite dramatically. And so after the journey, I would ask them, what did you experience for yourself? And then if I can remember everybody, I will tell them what I saw and what my guides did, and how, they were hanging you up by the hair and, over a fire or whatever. It's quite dramatic with my my guides, because their nature is very raw and direct, but always very loving. Yeah, always very loving. And I would feed that back to them, and that would help. That could help. Yeah, they could pinpoint where they themselves knew that they were kind of stuck, and there was a block or something like that. Yeah, a trauma, or maybe a bad relationship that they needed to cut.
Another aspect of that is, but this with the last couple of things, the last two or three things, because I want it to be not too long so that people can take in and these things and practically apply them. Flipping that one on its head for a moment, people who have experiences with so-called negative, entities or negative energies that have a more malevolent sort of streak, if you like. I must admit, again, I have experienced that as well personally, but I've also experienced it in certain situations. So, for example, I mean, this is not going to be a great stretch of the imagination, but when I've met people who are very involved in drugs for some reason, as in recreational drugs for some reason, there seems to be a lot of negative energy there, whether that's selling or using. I've never really gone into that myself. I just know people who have, so I don't really have the experience of those altered states. And I'm not talking about psychedelics here or things that are used more responsibly, because that's a whole different thing that we know can have positive effects. But I've also experienced it around, obviously, violent situations and things that are sometimes seen as so-called bad, though I know that's very subjective and open to interpretation, that there does seem to be a force there that, rather than bringing inspiration or love or some of these things, seems to cause revulsion. And the old adage, even though it's terribly cliche, of my hair standing on end and that type of stuff, does actually happen. And obviously some people have experienced that. And I suppose this leads into the realm of, like, are there, in your view and your experience, once again, I will say, I'm not putting you on the spot to answer everything, but just in your experience, are there demons and things of that nature, or are they projections of our mind as well, would you say, from your, teaching and your experience of being in divine connection so much? A lot of people are afraid of that aspect. So I feel, and this is very much a feeling from here, to address that, which goes into the deeper concept of fear.
Yeah. Well, I think you're afraid of a demon to the extent that you believe in it, that it has power over you. If you don't believe that, then it's kind of, it loses its power. Uh,
Mm.
I would still say that it's a projection, yeah. And I'm trying to think of a situation where I've been in where I've experienced, I haven't really experienced too much of that. Shamanic terms, it's kind of like where your energy is not integrated and it
Mm.
somehow works against you, begins to work against you, and can even take on another personality. And these can be very real. Quite a few books about schizophrenia and the power of these other characters that you can get. I mean, there's one famous book. I can't remember the name now, but he had multiple personalities, and some of them would have cancer, and some of them wouldn't. So the power of the mind is incredibly um, powerful,
Mm.
strong. I mean, you know, it's made all this. I'm looking out the window now into a lovely scene.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of limitless, and I would say the guiding measurement would be: is it in service to self or in service to others? So if the energy is a bit ambiguous, you know, you can investigate these things and dialogue with them, as I get people to do with their helpers, get to know them, see if they are um, benign or not, and usually are on a shamanic. But I do hear from other shamans that, yeah, you can have a jealous shaman who makes some kind of an attack in this other world. So, but my experience doesn't go that far as yet. I haven't been attacked. Yeah.
No, I haven't really been attacked. I mean, I've had, like I say, I've just felt it in certain situations. And again, the fear thing is true, but I've just felt almost like there's a force there in certain situations that could, it's certainly less potent actually than when you feel the love and some of the positive things we were talking about. Much more grounded, much more physical. But
I tell a lie. I do remember some, I think it was some kind of strong emotion. I was in meditation and it was trying to get hold of me. And I do remember, yeah, because you can, turning into fire and just burning it off and just went running away, you know. That was the imagery I got with it. But it's also very important to, we were talking about Christianity, to emphasize that if God is real and is and only God is real, that outside God nothing else is.
mm,
And defenselessness, as was demonstrated, this was the whole point of Yeshua and his story. His
mm,
defenselessness showed his power. Yeah, that was the idea. It was showing where true power is. And defenselessness is such a, for the ego, it's such a tough one, especially in this crazy world, you know, where we're on the brink of, well, we have wars and things, but and that's why this spiritual path is so radical. And that's why the spiritual path is, even amongst spiritual people, like monks and nuns, not very popular because they will have their own materialistic version of spirituality, which isn't true spirituality.
mm.
It's subtle, Liam, it's subtle.
Very subtle, yes. And my last question, Andrew, and I'll have to go shortly, but my very last question, when people are getting close to God, to the divine and so forth, I've noticed a pattern. And the pattern I've noticed is that, well, the pattern I've noticed is that there are patterns. In other words, um, when I've been working on this with meditation, with prayer, with any type of, including some of what led me onto the path in the first place. You know, you had the experience in the room and you were saying about the cliff top and the whole, change. When I've had experiences like that, around them, I have repeated physical experiences. So, the whole repeated numbers thing, the whole, for me, sevens everywhere, I mean, not in one, but usually two or three, so double or triple. I mean, okay, that could be coincidence, but it's massive. I can be driving down the road and there's number plates with, three sevens, one after another, and things like this, or, finding feathers everywhere, even in really, like I was sitting here and, a white feather will come in and land on me and I think, what? And, some of these things, they don't happen all the time, but they happen in bursts, along the spiritual path. And I find that, fascinating because, like you had the experience of the arrow, I've had a number of physical experiences. Like some people would regard them as mundane, but like I, get dressed in the morning, put my clothes on, and there's feathers in there, and there's things where they couldn't possibly be there, always white and things. And then other times it goes. Or, one of the things I have is finding pennies or cents, as it is in Cyprus everywhere, but always shiny new ones with ridiculous frequency. I mean, everyone finds some, but with just completely like, hold on. And I've spoken to other people, and they say, yeah, do you have that? And spiritual people will say yes, if you like. People who are on the path, on the search, on the I'm going to stop saying get closer to God now. People who are trying to uncover how close he already is say, oh, yeah, yeah, I have that. And then you speak to people who, for example, haven't had any of this awareness yet, and they'll be like, what, really? I mean, that's a stupid thing. And I've come across Carl Jung and his synchronicity.
Mm.
And again, I'm curious on this, even though it's more mundane, because I know that we went up a level to how close God really is to us, and we've gone down a level to some of the manifestations. But as I've already said, I want to make people comfortable with this, so that the search is, as I've already said, they can go about it however they want, but free from dogma and individual. But at the same time, some of the experiences people have, there are questions, and I haven't really found many people who answer them in a sort of useful manner, but you do. And I'm still not putting you on the spot to answer everything, but have you come across that concept of like these synchronistic patterns that appear to have meaning and they are actually physically manifest, as we would term that?
Yeah,
Understanding that that's a perception. Is that something that you've come across in your many years of
not a
experience?
great deal, to be honest, not a great deal, but now and again, I think more with meetings, that I will meet people, and just in the way I meet them, I will feel something,
Hmm.
you know. But as we said before, it's a very individual path, and something that means something to someone won't mean the same to another person. So the signs, the synchronicities you're getting will be custom made, tailor made for your own mind. They will be coming from your own mind, from the reality of love that works through and with your mind for as long as it thinks it's in the world.
It's interesting because I think it's because I mean, I see them less these days because I have the connection more of the time, if you like. But certainly when I was a bit younger and I was a bit more hard-headed with all of this stuff, um, concrete, then I think they just had to find a way to get through, if you like, or
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
cover the closeness that was all that was already there. Anyway, Andrew, we've had a very interesting talk today. I mean, with all of this, we've only really scratched the surface. But the reason I brought up certain experiences is just because they're common experiences that people have. So it's important for people who are just discovering this that we don't go too deep too fast. But then at the same time, we've also gone very deep in a few areas of this talk, which I think is immense value to people who are further forward. So hopefully we've done a little bit of both. Like I already said, I just appreciate you doing this because you were on the Zoom the other day with my family, myself, and that group. It was lovely to see you there, and I just had this strong pull, that how it goes with that type of stuff. This strong intuition to say, okay, we need to do a talk about this, and I don't know exactly what the result will be. On a very pragmatic level now in this the so-called world, the beauty of these kinds of talks is, we could put this out there. Someone might listen to it today and benefit from it, but somebody could listen to it 5 years from now and benefit when they're at their point of readiness to, start to open up a little bit more. And I think that is of immense value because people listen to this. I mean, the last one we did had really good feedback, and the last one we did also, I also personally found immensely helpful in a way that's unusual out of all the ones I do, because I do them for others primarily. But so there's a couple of things there, but very, very, very important. And in that sense, I know the sense of self and the ego and all of that stuff. We've been talking about diminishing that, but in that sense, the value that you personally contribute to people by more than by talking, by leading by example, really, of how some of these things are actually possible. I think that's of immense value. I'm not sure how you feel about it because it's very much an inward search for you. And then I know obviously you do teach and you do help people, but I think what you share is of immense value to people, and I hope that you realize that. And I do mean that from my heart. So hopefully the blast off will be a little while yet because I know you want it to be soon, but hopefully it'll be a little while because only because more people need to wake up to this, more people need to come back to who and what we really are, and obviously you share that, as I've said, by example. So anyway, so that's enough from me. Thank you, Andrew, very, very much for
You're
your time.
very welcome. Always a pleasure to talk with you, Liam.
And with you, I'm very grateful. And you enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope that obviously you'll be spending it with God, as we've spoken about, having a cup of tea and bacon sandwich and so forth. So it sounds very good, and I'm going to have something to eat now before my next meeting. But yeah, I'm sure we'll catch up again soon. And just thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And for now, please be well. And I'm glad that you.
Likewise. With you too.
Thank you. Be well, and we will speak soon.
Bye. Bye bye.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.